When the fog lifted off Portsmouth Harbor that morning, they saw her, drenched to the bone, clinging to a weathered trunk like it held her soul. She stood alone at the edge of the quay, shivering, her bare feet pressed against the slick cobblestones. Her dress, once cream-colored, now clung to her thin frame, heavy with seawater. The wind tugged at her soaked sleeves and whipped strands of dark hair across her face. Her fingers were white from gripping the iron handles of the trunk, and yet she didn't move, didn't flinch, as the sailors shouted and hauled ropes behind her. A few glanced her way. Most looked quickly away. The HMS Wexley, a 64-gun third-rate frigate bound for the Caribbean colonies, loomed in the harbor, its sails still furled, the boarding plank wet with morning mist. The quartermaster, a rotund man with sharp eyes and a wool coat stiff from salt, was halfway up the gangplank when her voice stopped him. "Please," she said, her voice barely above the sound of gulls overhead. "I was told this ship would take me." He turned. "We're not taking passengers." She stepped forward, dragging the heavy trunk. "I have orders. From the Crown." A folded parchment was clenched in her hand. Her arm trembled as she held it out. The quartermaster took it hesitantly, eyeing her as if she might dissolve into mist herself. The wax seal was unbroken. When he saw the insignia, Fairfax's crest, with its sunburst and lion rampant, his brow furrowed. He said nothing, only gestured for her to wait. She said thank you and collapsed to her knees beside the trunk, her fingers never leaving its side. Captain Lionel Gray read the letter twice. A seasoned officer with 20 years of windburn on his face and salt in his blood, he had little patience for mystery or favors owed to London's elite. But the seal was real, and the command unmistakable. The girl, Eliza Harrow, is to be delivered safely to Montserrat under naval protection. No inquiries. No delays. He watched her from the quarterdeck. She was young, 17 at most, with the haunted eyes of someone twice her age. Around her neck hung a tarnished medallion with faded Latin script. She spoke to no one, and when pressed by the first mate for details, only murmured, "I'll speak when it's safe." The trunk was brought aboard under protest from the boatswain. It bore 3 thick locks of blackened iron, no visible key. Its surface was scarred and pitted, the wood worn as if it had traveled farther than she had. More than one sailor claimed it hissed when touched, though none would say it aloud in front of the captain. From the moment she stepped on deck, unease settled over the Wexley like a second fog. Eliza was given space below deck, near the powder room, away from the officers, and certainly away from the captain's quarters. She slept beside the trunk. She never asked for food but accepted what was brought. Her voice, when she spoke, carried an accent that Northwest one could quite place, neither the lilt of Cornwall nor the rhythm of London. Something older, colder. By the second night, the whispers had begun. A sailor named Finch claimed he passed her chamber in the dark and heard her whispering through the trunk. He swore the voice that answered wasn't hers. Another said he saw her drawing symbols with ash on the floor. The cook, a man known more for superstition than sobriety, poured salt at every doorway and refused to enter the lower deck without a prayer. Eliza did nothing to dissuade them. She remained silent, eyes lowered, always within reach of her sealed burden. She wore the same wet dress for days, refused all offers of dry clothing, and spent her time staring at the wood-grain walls as if trying to remember something that had long since disappeared. On the 4th night, a storm began to shadow the ship. Wind snapped at the sails, the sea grew restless, and the barometer fell like a stone. The men worked harder, tying sails, battening hatches, but their eyes always drifted downward, toward the girl who never left the dark. The Wexley, once loud with song and sea shanties, fell quiet. Captain Gray, though hardened, felt it too. He sat longer at his desk, staring at the letter from Lord Fairfax, wondering what would justify such secrecy. He asked himself what could warrant the smuggling of a girl and a box across the ocean on His Majesty's ship. No answer ever felt satisfying. By the 6th night, the crew had lost sleep, and the sea had turned black beneath them. Eliza was seen only once that day, carrying a broken rosary through the gun deck. She didn't look at the men she passed. Her eyes remained fixed on the beads, her lips moving without sound. That night, the storm struck in full. Rain lashed the sails. Thunder cracked like cannon fire. The ship pitched hard enough to knock lanterns from their hooks. One midshipman, Elias Dane, a boy no older than 16, was sent below to secure the arms hold. He never came back. They searched the lower decks for hours. His saber was found near the girls' quarters, the blade snapped clean in two. His coat lay crumpled by the stairs. Eliza sat in her corner, wide awake, watching them with calm, unreadable eyes. The trunk remained sealed. Untouched. When dawn broke and the wind eased, a seaman named Avery returned from her chamber, pale and shaking. He said nothing at first. Then he handed the captain something, a scrap of cloth folded around a piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, smeared with red. Crude figures of men and fire. A black rectangle in the center. A figure inside the box. At the bottom, in a child's hand, *, don't open it. He's not finished yet, *. No one spoke. Captain Gray folded the paper and tucked it into his coat. His face, weathered by war and sea, held no expression. But his eyes lingered on the girl below, still clinging to her trunk as if it were the only thing keeping her heart from splitting wide open. The sea had turned to iron. Waves slammed against the hull of the Wexley like fists, and the wind howled down from the heavens as if the sky itself were cursing the voyage. Ropes snapped, lanterns swung wildly, and the deck groaned under the strain. Below, in the narrow passage between gunports and powder barrels, Eliza lay with her arms wrapped tight around the trunk. Her face was streaked with salt, some from the sea, more from tears. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Captain Gray stood over her, his coat soaked through, the royal letter crumpled in his clenched fist. "We're opening it," he said. Her eyes widened. She shook her head slowly, desperately, her voice cracking like wet parchment. "You can't. Please. You don't know what's inside." "I don't care," Gray growled. "My men are breaking. There's talk of mutiny, and a storm rising that shouldn't have followed us this far. Something's wrong, girl. And it started with that box." She lunged forward, clawing at the locks. "It's not a box. It's all that's left. You don't understand, if you open it, he'll know. He'll wake." Gray gave the signal. 2 Marines stepped forward, pried the rusted locks loose one by one. The iron groaned, shrieked like a living thing. Eliza screamed, flung herself between them, but her body was frail and her limbs gave way. She collapsed onto the floor as the final lock snapped and the lid slowly creaked open. The room fell silent. No gold. No letters. No trinkets of value or secrets from the crown. Just bones. Dozens of them, small, delicate, carefully wrapped in muslin. The cloths were stained and frayed, tied with ribbons now faded to ash gray. A child's femur rolled loose and clacked against the wooden floor. Beneath the bones, folded like a burial shroud, was a set of priest's vestments, moth-eaten, embroidered with a red cross so old it looked like dried blood. A decayed rosary spilled out, beads cracked, the crucifix warped and blackened with age. Dried lavender, brittle and scentless, scattered across the folds. One of the sailors backed away, crossing himself. Another vomited in the corner. Gray stared down, his mouth frozen open. And then they found the book. Tucked beneath the cloth and bone was a leather-bound diary, the cover brittle and crumbling in his hands. Gray opened it slowly, the pages stiff with age and damp. The script was dense, Latin, and beneath it, hurried Old English, scratched in the hand of a man long dead. The name inked at the top, * Father Anselm. Parish of St. Maurins. Yorkshire, *. Gray read aloud. * The hollowing is near complete, 13 chosen, cleansed in flame and prayer. Only one remains untested. The mother fought. She was hanged. The child will be studied, *. Eliza stirred at the sound, her voice hoarse. They called it a cleansing, but it was murder. 13 girls. Accused of consorting with the devil. We were 6, 7 years old. They burned rosemary under our beds. They said if we choked, we were impure. Her voice cracked. We all choked. The diary continued. The priest detailed nights beneath the abbey, cold chambers carved into the rock, where the girls were questioned, marked, and broken. The last entry, smeared with dried ink, was barely legible, * She hears him now. The little one. Even through the walls, *. Eliza sat upright slowly, her back to the hull, her eyes hollow but clear. My mother was a sold harrow. She tried to stop them. They hanged her in front of the congregation and said her death would purify us. I was taken below, but the fire never touched me. I escaped. I took her rosary. I ran. She gestured weakly toward the trunk. For years, I found them. The others. The ones they buried beneath the abbey, the ones hidden in barrels, sealed in walls. I found them all. This is them. A hush fell over the room. Even the storm above seemed to pause, listening. One of the men reached in and recoiled. He held a small sealed box, no bigger than a man's palm. Its lid was nailed shut with tiny iron spikes. When he pried it open, a stench wafted out, sweet and sickening. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a pile of human teeth. Not old. White. Clean. Some still with blood at the root. Folded beneath them was another note. A child's scrawl, asterisk. He still talks through the walls. Don't listen to him. He isn't father anymore, asterisk. The cabin's air turned heavy. A deep chill settled in the bones of the men who stood there. Then came the voices. Not loud. Not clear. But enough. Whispers behind the barrels. A quiet humming from somewhere that wasn't there a moment ago. Captain Gray turned, his eyes scanning every corner. His breath came in short gasps. At the edge of the mirror on his wall, he saw it, just for a moment. A girl, in white. Her eyes black as coal, mouth open as if to scream, but no sound escaped. He blinked and she was gone. The ship groaned above. The storm returned in full, slamming against the hull like judgment. Water burst through a crack and scattered across the planks. Panic bloomed among the crew. Half shouted to throw the trunk overboard. To cast the bones and the book into the sea before worse befell them. The others stood their ground, shaken but firm. One sailor, eyes brimming with tears, whispered, they were children. We cannot do that. Not to them. Fists were clenched. A blade was drawn. For a moment, Gray thought he might have to fire his pistol just to restore order. But then Eliza spoke. She didn't shout. She didn't rise. Her voice was steady. Come. You opened it, she said. He knows now. He's waking. He was locked away with them, and now he's free. We won't make it to shore. Not without finishing what was started. Gray stepped forward. What are you talking about? He won't let us reach land. Not until they are buried. All of them. Where the abbey once stood. You've brought them too far from home. And he's angry. The wind outside screamed like a beast. Gray looked around. His men stood trembling. The ship was full of shadows that hadn't been there before. The bones were real. The diary was real. And he was beginning to believe the curse might be too. Eliza looked up at him, her face pale, her hands still resting on the muslin shrouds. You opened it, she whispered again. Now we all must carry it. The sickness came quietly. First it was Daverns, the carpenter, his hands shaking so violently he could no longer hold a chisel. Then Macklin, the quartermaster, who lost his sight overnight, screaming about pale girls climbing through the rigging. By the 5th day, 5 were dead. Their bodies swelled and blistered, tongues blackening, eyes sealed shut with blood. The air aboard the Wexley turned sour, heavy with rot and salt. The men stopped eating. Rats poured from the walls like water. The galley was overrun. Food spoiled. Rain leaked through seams in the deck. The surgeon wept as he worked, cauterizing sores with heated iron, but it was no use. Whatever had awakened, it had marked them. Eliza wore black now. Each morning she moved through the infected hold like a shade, barefoot, veiled, silent. Her hands, pale and deliberate, tended to the dying with a reverence that unsettled the crew. She fed them water, wiped their fevered brows, whispered prayers that none recognized. Not once did she flinch or weep. The priest's diary had vanished. Captain Gray noticed first. His quarters were always locked, yet one morning the leather-bound book was gone, as if it had walked out on its own. No one claimed to have seen it. Eliza, when asked, only tilted her head and said, words have already done enough harm. Gray began to unravel. In the dim oil light of his cabin, he wrote furiously into the ship's log, whole pages filled with cryptic verses and shaking lines. Asterisk, we were never meant to know what they did. The tunnels below Yorkshire were not built for worship. There was never a god in that place. Only hunger, asterisk. He stopped sleeping. His eyes hollowed, cheeks sunken, beard unkempt. Once, Simmons found him barefoot on the deck at midnight, staring into the sea and muttering about children's laughter in the sails. Asterisk, stone walls. Wet voices. Always behind me. Never catching, only waiting, asterisk. The orders from the Admiralty, deliver crates of muskets and powder to a colonial garrison in Montserrat, were sealed and forgotten in the hold. Gray stood before the helm, his voice hoarse with cold and command. We change course, he said. To the north. To Mull. There's a ruin there, black stone and buried sin. That's where it began. That's where it must end. No one argued. Those still breathing had long stopped asking questions. The compass spun wildly in the captain's hand. The maps warped with sea spray and ash. Yet somehow, the ship turned north. The Wexley limped toward the Scottish coast, sails torn, hull creaking like a dying creature. Fog hung over the water like a burial shroud. Gulls screamed and fled inland. No ships crossed their path. No stars guided them. Then, after 14 days and 17 deaths, they saw it. Mull rose from the mist like a specter, sharp cliffs, grey sky, a crooked tower gnawed down by centuries of salt. At its heart stood the abbey, forgotten and blackened by time. Ivy strangled its stones. Crosses hung broken in the earth. A silence deeper than death cloaked the ruins. They made landfall during a gale. Rain lashed their faces like whips. Waves crashed against the shore, nearly dragging the longboat back to sea. But still they carried the trunk, 6 men and Eliza, her veil streaming behind her like a mourning banner. Up the hill they climbed, through thorns and graves and shattered angels. The altar stood at the highest point, a slab of soot-stained granite, its surface cracked and lichen-covered. No names were etched upon it. Only a single gouge, like a wound, down the center. One by one, the men opened the trunk. Eliza knelt beside them, her fingers unwrapping each muslin shroud with the care of a mother laying her child to rest. They placed the bones into the hollow beneath the altar, and the wind howled louder with each offering. The air trembled as if holding its breath. When the last femur touched the stone, the storm stopped. No rain. No thunder. No sound at all. The clouds parted, not with sunlight, but with a gray stillness that stretched over sea and sky like a shroud finally laid flat. They stood there, breathing hard, unsure what they'd done. And Eliza was gone. No footprints. No farewell. Only her veil, caught on a bramble bush near the cliffs. Some swore they saw her walk into the sea, her dress trailing behind her like fog. Others insisted a man in a red cassock had appeared from the ruins and taken her by the hand. No one dared to check. The Wexley sailed home in silence. Of the original crew, only 14 returned. They spoke little, kept their heads down, and refused shore leave for months. Their skin bore strange marks, cross-shaped boils, faded as if burned into them from within. Captain Gray resigned 3 days after returning to Portsmouth. He handed over the logbook to the Admiralty, then walked into the mist and never came back. Some say he joined a monastery in the north. Others claim he drowned himself with stones tied to his feet. The Crown sealed the records. No official account of the voyage exists. The manifest was altered. The weapons delivery reclassified. The crew dispersed quietly, most taking work on merchant vessels or vanishing altogether. Not one name from the Wexley's final mission appears in naval records again. And though the Abbey stone still weeps when the wind is right, not a single name from that voyage was ever carved into naval record again.